The Roman Republic. Setting the stage. While the great civilization of Greece was in decline, a new city to the west was developing and increasing its power. Rome grew from a small settlement to a mighty civilization that eventually conquered the Mediterranean world. In time, the Romans would build one of the most famous and influential empires in history. The origins of Rome. According to legend, the city of Rome was founded in 753 BC by Romulus and Remus, twin sons of the god Mars and a Latin princess. The twins were abandoned on the Tiber River as infants and raised by a she-wolf. The twins decided to build a city near the spot. In reality, it was men not immortals who built the city, and they chose the spot largely for its strategic location and fertile soil. Rome's geography. Rome was built on 7 rolling hills at a curve on the Tiber River, near the center of the Italian peninsula. It was midway between the Alps and Italy's southern tip. Rome also was near the midpoint of the Mediterranean Sea. The first Romans. The earliest settlers on the Italian peninsula arrived in prehistoric times. From about 1000 to 500 BC, 3 groups inhabited the region and eventually battled for control. They were the Latins, the Greeks, and the Etruscans. The Latins built the original settlement at Rome, a cluster of wooden huts atop one of its 7 hills, Palatine Hill. These settlers were considered to be the first Romans. Between 750 and 600 BC, the Greeks established colonies along southern Italy and Sicily. The cities became prosperous and commercially active. They brought all of Italy, including Rome, into closer contact with Greek civilization. The Etruscans were native to northern Italy. They were skilled metalworkers and engineers. The Etruscans strongly influenced the development of Roman civilization. They boasted a system of writing, for example, and the Romans adopted their alphabet. They also influenced Rome's architecture, especially the use of the arch. The early Republic. Around 600 BC, an Etruscan became king of Rome. In the decades that followed, Rome grew from a collection of hilltop villages to a city that covered nearly 500 square miles. Various kings ordered the construction of Rome's first temples and public centers, the most famous of which was the Forum, the heart of Roman political life. The last king of Rome was Tarquin the Proud. A harsh tyrant, he was driven from power in 509 BC. The Romans declared they would never again be ruled by a king. Instead, they established a republic, from the Latin phrase residentia publica, which means public affairs. A republic is a form of government in which power rests with citizens, who have the right to vote for their leaders. In Rome, citizenship with voting rights was granted only to freeborn male citizens. Patricians and plebeians. In the early republic, different groups of Romans struggled for power. One group was the patricians, the wealthy landowners who held most of the power. The other important group was the plebeians, the common farmers, artisans, and merchants who made up the majority of the population. The patricians inherited their power and social status. They claimed that their ancestry gave them the authority to make laws for Rome. The plebeians were citizens of Rome with the right to vote. However, they were barred by law from holding most important government positions. In time, Rome's leaders allowed the plebeians to form their own assembly and elect representatives called tribunes. Tribunes protected the rights of the plebeians from unfair acts of patrician officials. 12 Tables. An important victory for the plebeians was to force the creation of a written law code. With laws unwritten, patrician officials often interpreted the law to suit themselves. In 451 BC, a group of 10 officials began writing down Rome's laws. The laws were carved on 12 tablets, or tables, and hung in the Forum. They became the basis for later Roman law. The 12 Tables established the idea that all free citizens had a right to the protection of the law. Government under the Republic. In the 1st century BC, Roman writers boasted that Rome had achieved a balanced government. What they meant was that their government had taken the best features of a monarchy, government by a king, and aristocracy, government by nobles, and a democracy, government by the people. See the comparison above of Rome to the United States. Rome had 2 officials called consuls. Like kings, they commanded the army and directed the government. However, their power was limited. A consul's term was only 1 year long. The same person could not be elected consul again for 10 years. Also, one consul could always overrule or veto the other's decisions. The Senate was the aristocratic branch of Rome's government. It had both legislative and administrative functions in the Republic. Its 300 members were chosen from the upper class of Roman society. Later, plebeians were allowed in the Senate. The Senate exercised great influence over both foreign and domestic policy. The assemblies represented the more democratic side of the government. For example, an assembly organized by the plebeians, the tribal assembly, elected the tribunes and made laws for the common people, and later for the republic itself. In times of crisis, the republic could appoint a dictator, a leader who had absolute power to make laws and command the army. A dictator's power lasted for only 6 months. Dictators were chosen by the consuls and then elected by the Senate. The Roman army. In addition to their government, the Romans placed great value on their military. All citizens who owned land were required to serve in the army. Seekers of certain public offices had to perform 10 years of military service. Roman soldiers were organized into large military units called legions. The Roman legion was made up of some 5,000 heavily armed foot soldiers, infantry. A group of soldiers on horseback, cavalry, supported each legion. Legions were divided into smaller groups of 80 men, each of which was called a century. The military organization and fighting skill of the Roman army were key factors in Rome's rise to greatness. Rome spreads its power. For hundreds of years after the founding of the Republic, Rome sought to expand its territories through trade and conquest. Rome conquers Italy. Roman power grew slowly but steadily as the legions battled for control of the Italian peninsula. By the 4th century BC, the Romans dominated central Italy. Eventually, they defeated the Etruscans to the north and the Greek city-states to the south. By 265 BC, the Romans were masters of nearly all Italy. Rome had different laws and treatment for different parts of its conquered territory. The neighboring Latins on the Tiber became full citizens of Rome. In territories farther from Rome, conquered peoples enjoyed all the rights of Roman citizenship except the vote. All other conquered groups fell into a third category, allies of Rome. Rome did not interfere with its allies, as long as they supplied troops for the Roman army, and did not make treaties of friendship with any other state. The new citizens and allies became partners in Rome's growth. This lenient policy toward defeated enemies helped Rome to succeed in building a long-lasting empire. For more than 2 centuries, after 265 BC, Roman power spread far beyond Italy. Rome's commercial network. Rome's location gave it easy access to the riches of the lands ringing the Mediterranean Sea. Roman merchants moved by land and sea. They traded Roman wine and olive oil for a variety of foods, raw materials, and manufactured goods from other lands. However, other large and powerful cities interfered with Roman access to the Mediterranean. One such city was Carthage. Once a colony of Phoenicia, Carthage was located on a peninsula on the North African coast. Its rise to power soon put it in direct opposition with Rome. War with Carthage. In 264 BC, Rome and Carthage went to war. This was the beginning of the long struggle known as the Punic Wars. Between 264 and 146 BC, Rome and Carthage fought 3 wars. The first, for control of Sicily and the western Mediterranean, lasted 23 years, 264 to 241 BC. It ended in the defeat of Carthage. The Second Punic War began in 218 BC. The mastermind behind the war was a 29-year-old Carthaginian general named Hannibal. Hannibal was a brilliant military strategist who wanted to avenge Carthage's earlier defeat. Hannibal assembled an army of 50,000 infantry, 9,000 cavalry, and 60 elephants with the intent of capturing Rome. Instead of a head-on attack, however, Hannibal sought to surprise the Romans with a most daring and risky move. He led his army on a long trek from Spain across France and through the Alps. Despite losing more than half his men and most of his elephants, the general's move initially worked. For more than a decade, he marched his forces up and down the Italian peninsula at will. Hannibal won his greatest victory at Cannae in 216 BC. There his army inflicted enormous losses on the Romans. However, the Romans regrouped and with the aid of many allies stood firm. They prevented Hannibal from capturing Rome. Rome triumphs finally. The Romans found a daring military leader to match Hannibal's boldness. A general named Scipio devised a plan to attack Carthage. This strategy forced Hannibal to return to defend his native city. In 202 BC, at Zama near Carthage, the Romans finally defeated Hannibal. During the Third Punic War, 149 to 146 BC, Rome laid siege to Carthage. In 146 BC, the city was set afire, and its 50,000 inhabitants sold into slavery. Its territory was made a Roman province. Rome's victories in the Punic Wars gave it dominance over the western Mediterranean. The Romans then went on to conquer the eastern half. By about 70 BC, Rome's Mediterranean empire stretched from Anatolia in the east to Spain in the west. As you will read in Section 2, however, such growth and power brought with it a new set of difficulties.